Welcome to today's deep dive, where we're going to be jumping into the world of Kathryn Stockett's The Help. We're going back in time to the American South in the early 1960s.
Ooh, fascinating time period.
Really is. And we have a couple of different audiobook versions to help us out along the way. One from YouTube and then another one, an MP3 audiobook. So ready to kind of get immersed in this world.
Absolutely. It's amazing how The Help uses fiction to really just expose the raw realities of that time period. You know, the racial segregation, that social hierarchy that was just baked into life in Jackson, Mississippi.
Yeah.
And by weaving together the voices of these three main characters, Abilene, Minnie, and Skeeter, Stockett creates this really multi-layered narrative.
Yeah, and you really get pulled in. It's
Yeah.
that narrative structure, seeing the same events unfold, but through these three very distinct lenses.
Right.
It really adds a whole other dimension to the story.
Yeah.
So we begin with Abilene, a black maid who's working for the Leafel, raising their children while her own son is at home. And her story just really highlights the deep inequalities that were just woven into the fabric of society back then.
You really see that. And her experiences are just so powerful and poignant. Like when she talks about cleaning the Francis I silver service
Oh, yeah.
at the governor's mansion. And she was just a teenager. Like the shame that she felt after being unjustly fired from that job.
Right.
Really speaks volumes about, the constant threat of just humiliation and powerlessness that black people faced at that time.
It's heavy stuff. And then there's that terrible, awful incident with Miss Hilly's bathroom. Crazy how this seemingly small detail
Right.
about bathroom usage becomes this huge symbol of segregation and its dehumanizing effects. What really stuck out to you about that?
Honestly, it was how that incident impacted not just Abilene, but also Mae Mobley, the little girl that she is raising.
Oh, yeah.
Because it shows how segregation was being used to instill fear and prejudice from a really young age, just perpetuating that cycle of discrimination.
It just makes you think, like, wow, this wasn't just an isolated thing. This was like a whole system
It was a system.
designed to oppress and control.
Absolutely.
And then there's that scene where Abilene takes Mae Mobley to the colored swimming pool.
Yeah.
You can just feel the weight of segregation in that moment.
Right. There's this like fleeting sense of joy and freedom, but it's totally overshadowed by the fact that this basic pleasure, going for a swim, was denied to so many people.
Right.
Just because of the color of their skin.
Just another example of how segregation permeated every aspect of their lives.
Every aspect.
So let's talk about Minnie.
Yes.
Abilene's friend. Known for her amazing cooking skills, but also, let's be real, that sharp tongue.
Oh, yeah. She does not hold back.
She's not afraid to speak her mind. And her experiences, they really shed light on the economic situation of black women back then.
Absolutely. And Minnie's story is so compelling because it's like she embodies this quiet resistance.
Like when she gets fired after being promised a paid vacation, it just exposes how, black women were often at the mercy of their white employers.
Yeah.
And there's that powerful quote where she says that shame is the color of a new white uniform.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Right. And it speaks to that constant pressure to be subservient, to swallow their anger and resentment.
And then there's her unforgettable, terrible, awful revenge on Miss Hilly. It's hilarious, but it also reveals a lot. What are your thoughts on that?
It's definitely entertaining, but her act of defiance, I think it goes beyond just, simple revenge. It
Yeah.
speaks to the psychological impact of living under that kind of constant oppression, that need to just assert your own agency
Right.
in any way that you can.
And it just reminds us that even in a system designed to silence them, these women found ways to resist, to fight back, to maintain their dignity.
Absolutely.
So now let's bring Skeeter into the mix.
Okay.
The young white woman who's trying to find her own place in all of this.
Yeah. An aspiring writer. Feels kind of out of place among her social circle. Always reminded that she's an outsider, partly because of her height, hence the nickname Skeeter.
Skeeter, yeah. Her discomfort with those social norms is really what sets her on this whole journey.
Yeah.
And her relationship with Constantine, her family's maid, really encouraged her to think for herself, to question the way things were.
And the mystery surrounding Constantine's sudden departure
Right.
really fueled her desire to understand what was really going on beneath the surface.
It seems like that relationship with Constantine really planted the seeds of empathy and understanding for Skeeter.
Yeah.
Allowing her to see past those, superficial differences and really grasp the complexities of race and class.
And then there's that whole thing with her job writing the Miss Myrna cleaning advice column.
Right.
Which sparks the idea for the book that's going to change everything.
It's like this turning point for her. That column,
Yeah.
as silly as it seems, becomes this catalyst for her own self-discovery. And it leads her to realize that black women's voices were completely missing from the narratives that were shaping their own community.
It's amazing how that seemingly insignificant vacant job led to such a huge shift.
Right.
So now we get to the Help project itself. Skeeter's bold idea to write a book about the lives of Black maids in Jackson, told from their perspective. It's such a gripping part of the story, all the secret meetings, the trust that slowly builds between Skeeter and Aibileen.
It's intense.
And the massive challenge of finding maids who are brave enough to share their stories.
And Skeeter's endeavor really brings up this huge question. What does it mean to tell someone else's story? It's really about representation. But you got to think about the potential for exploitation, too.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
Yeah. And then there's that scene where Skeeter stumbles upon those Jim Crow laws at the library. It's like a punch to the gut. Seeing the stark reality of systemic racism just laid out in black and white.
It's a heavy moment.
Yep.
The discovery of those laws adds a whole other layer to the story.
Right.
It provides that like historical and legal context for the injustices that they faced every day.
Yeah.
It really highlights how segregation wasn't just some social thing. It was codified into law.
Wow.
Denying Black people basic human rights.
It's chilling to think about how these laws directly impacted their lives, limiting their opportunities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, it went beyond just individuals. Those laws were used to maintain a hierarchy, a racial and economic hierarchy that made sure white people stayed in control. And the Help exposes that human cost, the everyday struggles, but also the triumphs of those living under that shadow.
It's so impactful how the novel combines those big historical forces with the little details of daily life.
Yeah, it makes it feel so real. And those themes of race and class, they're woven into their relationships too.
Absolutely.
Like you see the casual cruelty of segregation, how it just becomes normal, next to the incredible resilience of these Black women like Aibileen and Minnie.
It's heartbreaking, but it also shows their strength.
So much strength.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that the novel doesn't shy away from the nuances of class within the Black community.
Oh, right.
We see that with Aibileen and Yule May, especially with the incident of the stolen ring.
Yeah. That's a tough one. It really shows just how vulnerable Black women were in that system.
Absolutely. They were trapped in this cycle of poverty, often forced into making impossible choices just to survive.
It adds another layer of complexity to the story's exploration of injustice.
It reminds us that oppression operates on so many different levels.
Yeah.
Even within marginalized communities, you have these layers of disadvantage and hardship.
So much to unpack there.
Right.
But let's move on to this theme of friendship and betrayal. It really takes center stage as the Help project moves forward and secrets start coming out. The dynamics between Skeeter, Hilly, and Elizabeth. It's like watching a train wreck in slow motion.
Yeah, you can't look away. And you see how the relationships fall apart, and it really exposes the cracks in Southern society. Like their interactions, they highlight the hypocrisy and the compromises so many white people made to keep things the way they were.
And the terrible, awful incident.
Yes.
Leading to that big rift between Skeeter and Hilly.
That's a perfect example. It's a turning point in the story. It shows how even close friendships can just crumble when confronted with the truth about racial injustice.
What's striking is how that event shows Skeeter becoming more aware and courageous.
Definitely. She's willing to risk her social standing to stand with the Black community.
Wow.
It speaks volumes about her evolving understanding of justice and equality.
It's a complete contrast to Hilly,
right,
who just clings to her prejudices and the existing power structure.
It's really a testament to the power of individual growth.
Yeah.
Courage to choose what's right, even when it means going against the people you're closest to.
It's a powerful reminder that even small acts of courage can have a ripple effect.
Absolutely.
So, speaking of powerful acts, let's talk about the power of storytelling itself.
Okay.
The Help gives a voice to those who are so often silenced, and it forces us, as readers, to confront some uncomfortable truths.
Absolutely. And the book's title itself, it's not just about domestic help, it's about agency and strength.
Right.
The way these women supported each other and lifted each other up.
It's about their resilience and their power.
Exactly. And that's what makes The Help so captivating.
It's not just a story about the past, it's a story that resonates today.
Yeah.
Because it addresses these universal themes: the fight for justice, searching for identity, the complexities of human relationship.
Right. And it's all brought to life through these incredibly vivid characters. Aibileen, Minnie, Skeeter. They feel so real, so relatable.
Even with their flaws.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so powerful. It's not about abstract ideas. It's about people we care about, whose struggles we feel deeply. And it's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope and resilience can prevail.
It's about the courage to speak truth to power, even when it's risky and even when you might lose everything.
That courage is contagious, and it inspires us to keep fighting for a better world long after we we finish the book. It's a reminder that each of us have a role to play in shaping a more just and compassionate future. And it reminds us that we all have stories to tell.
And that those stories deserve to be heard. Now, there's this whole other layer we haven't really talked about yet, the civil rights movement itself and how it impacted their lives. We see these events like, Medgar Evers' assassination, James Meredith integrating Ole Miss. It's like history is this backdrop constantly pushing against their lives.
And those events are so important because they ground the novel in this specific time and place. You realize these characters are living through this huge moment in American history.
Yeah.
The fear and the uncertainty.
Yeah.
But also the hope for something better. It's all there.
Yeah.
You feel it in those scenes where they're listening to the news unfold.
Oh, absolutely. Like that scene where Aibileen and Minnie are listening to the radio, hearing about Medgar Evers. And Minnie's reaction is just so raw.
Heartbreaking.
She says, "Things ain't never gone change in this town, Aibileen. We living in hell. We trapped. Our kids is trapped."
That quote just gets me every time. It's that feeling of despair so many Black people felt. Despite everything the civil rights movement was doing, the violence, the oppression, it was hard to believe things would ever truly change. That feeling of being trapped.
But even in that despair, you still see that flicker of determination.
Yeah.
Refusing to give up.
You see it in how they support each other.
Yeah.
They find strength in their community.
Exactly. And that's what's so powerful about The Help. It doesn't just point out the injustice. It shows that struggle between despair and hope, finding the strength to keep going even when it feels impossible.
It's about resilience.
Yeah.
The human spirit.
And the power of community. We see it so clearly in the church scenes. The way the maids share their stories, their struggles, their hopes and dreams, even facing all that, they found comfort and strength in one another.
Absolutely. That sense of community was vital. A source of strength, of comfort, of purpose. It's a reminder that we're not alone in our struggles, that when we work together, we can make a difference.
Makes you wonder how those communities manage to not only survive, but actually thrive in the face of so much adversity.
It's truly remarkable. It speaks to that need for connection.
Yeah.
Finding support when you're going through tough times together. Even when the system tries to push you down and divide you, human connection can be that lifeline.
So true. Now, before we move on, I want to go back to the Help Project for a minute. It raises some interesting ethical questions, especially for Skeeter.
Right.
Here she is, a white woman, writing about the lives of Black maids.
Yeah, that's a tricky situation.
Complicated, for sure.
Throughout the book, Skeeter's really wrestling with her own privilege and the possibility of exploitation. She knows she's benefiting from their stories, even while trying to give them a platform.
And there's that scene where Aibileen actually confronts Skeeter about it. She asks, "What if you don't like what I got to say about white people?"
Ooh, powerful moment.
Really highlights that power imbalance. Skeeter is stepping into a world she doesn't fully understand.
Yeah.
And she needs to be ready to hear things that might make her uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And that tension between Skeeter's good intentions and the potential for harm, that's woven through the entire story.
It really makes us ask those tough questions about allyship.
Yeah.
And the role of empathy in fighting for social justice.
It's a reminder that good intentions aren't enough. It's about listening, about learning, about challenging your own assumptions.
And understanding those power dynamics, making sure those who are most affected are the ones leading the way.
Right. Amplifying their voices instead of speaking for them.
It makes you really think about the responsibility of telling someone else's story.
Absolutely. It's a responsibility that requires humility, respect, and a deep understanding of the complexities. And The Help provides this framework for these conversations. How can we be more thoughtful and ethical in our own storytelling, in our own allyship?
So as we start to wrap up our deep dive into The Help, I want to leave our listeners with a question. Knowing what you know now about what these Black maids went through, how would you approach conversations about race and social justice differently? What steps can you take in your own life to fight against these systems of oppression, to help build a more just and equitable world?
These are big questions, but they're worth thinking about. The stories of Aibileen, Minnie, Skeeter, they remind us that even small acts of courage can make a difference. And each of us has a part to play in creating a better world.
It starts with awareness, with understanding, and with action.
It's about recognizing that the fight for justice, for equality, it doesn't end. And we all have a responsibility to make things better.
And it's a reminder that those stories are out there, just waiting to be told.
Oh.
Going back to The Help for a second, I can't stop thinking about that scene at the colored swimming pool, that image of Aibileen having this pure moment of joy with Mae Mobley, but knowing that so many others were denied that same simple pleasure.
Yeah, it really captures the reality of life under segregation. Even when there's joy, there's always that shadow of injustice hanging over everything. It just shows how absurd it was. A system that could tell people they can't even go for a swim because of their skin color.
It's crazy to think about, and it makes you think about how all those experiences, those everyday injustices really shaped their lives.
Absolutely. And it challenges us to look at our own world today.
Yeah.
Are those same systems of oppression still around, maybe in different forms? It's a call to be aware and to work towards dismantling anything that keeps people from having equal opportunities.
It's a reminder that fighting for justice is a never-ending process. Now, before we wrap things up, I wanted to touch on something we mentioned earlier, the criticism The Help got.
Okay.
Some folks argue that it kind of romanticizes the relationship between white women and their black maids.
Right.
And that it doesn't really accurately capture the voices of black women. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's important to listen to those critiques and really think about them. The book is powerful, but it is told from the perspective of a white woman. We have to be aware of that. The voices and experiences of black women need to be at the center of these conversations.
It's a good point. We should always try to look for different perspectives and think critically about who's telling the story and how they're telling it.
Exactly. It's about making sure that those who have been pushed to the margins have a chance to share their own stories in their own way.
Well, I think we've covered a lot today. We've explored those complex issues of race, class, and social justice in the American South during the Civil Rights era. All through the lens of The Help, we got to know Aibileen, Minnie, and Skeeter, and we wrestled with some tough ethical questions that the book brings up.
It's been quite a journey. The Help may be fiction, but it gives us a glimpse into such a pivotal time in history, and it forces us to look at some hard truths about ourselves and our society.
It reminds us that the fight for justice and equality never really ends. We have to stay engaged, stay informed, and be willing to challenge the way things are.
And it reminds us how powerful storytelling can be, the importance of listening to voices that are often silenced, and the incredible resilience of people, even when facing the toughest challenges.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into The Help. We hope this conversation has given you some new insights and maybe inspired you to think a little differently about the world.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep fighting for a more just world for everyone.